Hello, and welcome to Infinite Shelf, the human centric retail podcast. I'm your host, Ingrid Millman Cordy, and welcome to season 3. I am so excited that you're here, and I'm actually even more excited. Sorry, audience, but I'm more excited that Orchid is here with us. Orchid, please introduce yourself and let the audience know how lucky I am for you to be a co-host this season, and how lucky they are to just have your wisdom imparted upon them this year.
Hi, Ingrid. Thank you so much for the kind introduction and hello, audience. I am excited for both of you and myself as well to be a part of Infinite Shelf, especially for season 3. So Ingrid and I were chatting and we were talking about we had a lots of thoughts about e-commerce as one does, and we really wanted to kind of share that because I think a lot of the challenges that D2C is facing and that we face on a day-to-day basis could be applicable and is probably felt by everyone who's listening to this as well. So I'm so incredibly honored and happy to be here and happy to share some background about myself and how I got here. Does that sound good to you, Ingrid?
Oh, please. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I am currently the chief operating officer at Common Thread Collective, which is a growth marketing agency. I've been here for about 2 years, working across a lot of e commerce clients, whether it's clients who started in very traditional avenues in brick and mortar, going e commerce, or digitally native darlings. Prior to this, I spent about 6 years at Nestle USA as the head of digital innovation and strategy. And I would say my responsibilities kind of ran the gamut from building Toll House's first digital human using artificial intelligence, which apparently is very relevant again.
No. AI? Really?
Not so strange. And also standing up the D2C capabilities within Nestle, because as many of you may know, I mean, the company is over 150 years old, and D2C, I would say, past 10 years, has really been setting the pace for how brands should be engaging with consumers digitally. So while I was at Nestle, I really became passionate about the e-commerce space and found myself gravitating towards small and medium businesses. Although one would argue that any company or any business smaller than Nestle is just every business. But that's really kind of what drove that change or that career change for me to go from large enterprise, very traditional, very retailer centric in order to focus on e-commerce.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because we sort of approached our careers in complete diametrically opposite directions, which I think has made for some very interesting conversations one on one that I hope that we'll be able to start sharing with the audience. But like I grew up in e-commerce first, D2C, always with like big companies. I worked at the Estee Lauder companies and so on. But um, so now I'm at Nestle, but the other side of Nestle, Nestle Health Science. And you would think we met through the Nestle network, but of course we didn't because that's how the world works. But I just find so many exciting and fun nuggets of perspective and information that we kind of like come together from our different angles and share. And so I'm just excited to go on this journey of season 3 with you. And I think if you heard the wrap up for season 2, we teased a little bit about what the season was going to be about. And the season is all about D2C and what do we do with D2C now, right? We're a good 10 years into the D2C journey. We are no longer, or D2C is no longer, we are still very much the bells of the ball.
Always.
Always, or the disruptors, however you want to look at it. I think sort of both things are true, and it's been really interesting because our careers and our time in the workforce, frankly, due to our age, has been very parallel to D2C. And so there's a lot of commonality between sort of these aging millennials in the workforce and D2C and how it becomes a mature business and how do we continue to think about D2C and how do we evolve? How do we evolve as people and people who are hopefully adding value to the people that we work with, the companies that we help build and advise, and how do we add value to, the world, and what are we putting out into the world that makes sense, that is beyond just thinking about things differently, right? Because it is important to always think about things differently, but I think there's a part that it starts going from disruptor phase into, okay, now what, like this maintenance phase, and there's so much to explore there, and I'm just excited about coming along that journey with you all, and definitely Orchid on season 3. So
Yeah.
so happy that you're here.
Same, and 100%. I mean, even before Nestle, it was creative agency side and consulting side. And I would say, to build on what you said about us coming up with or maturing with D2C, I would argue that's the same with social media. I mean, we
Totally.
are I reject the label geriatric millennial, but I will accept millennial-old, and I think it's interesting that we have lived through so much of digital history, right? I remember being 10 years old and signing on to Prodigy, going online for the first time. At that time, I
Mhm.
probably shouldn't have done that unsupervised, but, hindsight. And then, Mark Zuckerberg and I are the same age. So Facebook really launched my sophomore year of college. And so we grew up with that. And
Totally.
D2C, when you think about Warby Parker, I mean, Warby Parker, I want to say launched probably around 2010 because I was in New York at the time, and it was Warby Parker, Bonobos. My husband had an online shirt company. And I would say too that D2C has followed that um, Gartner hype cycle, where there was peak hype cycle of cheap CPMs on Facebook.
Totally.
And there was a lot of arbitrage that was happening. And I think that if we fast forward to 2022, that was the year that nobody expected. The quote that I continue to use with my team to describe what happened in 2022 leading into this year is a Warren Buffett quote. And he says, "No, you don't know who's swimming naked until the tide goes out."
Oh my god, Orchid, I literally said that to my team yesterday. Like, I swear, I'm not even kidding, yesterday. And it's so true. And I love you brought up such a valid point about social media and D2C, and they're just inextricably linked. There is no D2C without social media. And they just would never have been, they complement each other, they enable each other to exist. One of them, purchases all of their media from social media and is their biggest customer, and then the other just allows them that ability to go direct to consumer. Like, we were thinking about, I was talking about this with a colleague the other day, where it used to be that the packaging team, right, like the people who design the actual physical packaging for a product, was the brand strategy team, or like the marketing team, right? Because ultimately, the only way that you can talk about your product to a consumer was through your packaging on the shelf, or through your packaging in a visual, likely print ad, right? And so you really did have all of your all of your communication to a consumer through packaging, which made total sense. Enter in social media, to your point, and it's almost like I liken it to the Wizard of Oz, right? So it was like this black and white world where it was like very simple. Like, you have your packaging, and that's you have to talk about your claims, and you talk about your brand colors and your font and all of these really still very important things. But then you open up social media and all of these other ways to connect to your consumer directly. And it's like the color opens up in the world. And all of a sudden, these brands that are one or two dimensional have to become three dimensional, right? You become like where you have to have a tone of voice. Are you coming through as a friend? Are you coming through as a trusted advisor? Are you being a big sister or a authoritative figure in their life? Like, there's all of these characteristics that start to become necessary for a brand when you have social media that enables both, right? It enables the ability for a brand to go direct to consumer, because now you have this like connection that you need to foster and build with your consumers. And then you also have like the social media piece where now you have access to actually tell those stories and tell those jokes if you want to tell a joke, or give those statistics if that's your brand. And it just completely changed the game. And that, I think, is one of the components, spoiler alert, that I think is going to live on forever. Like, that is one of the things that D2C, the floodgates that D2C, or the Pandora's box, I should say, that D2C opened, that social media enabled, that is just table stakes at this point.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'll add to that that the combination of social media and D2C really inherently sparked the change in power dynamics between brand and consumer.
Yes.
Prior to social media, if you look at television, if you look at out of home, if you look at packaging, right? The brand was exactly what the brand told the consumer they were. It was very much push messaging. And now with social media and with D2C, I think that is an interesting offer that D2C has to their consumers, is to say, "Hey, build with us." Right? Let's get your feedback. Let's tighten the feedback loop. What do you think about the product? You've got the
Oh,
founder emailing the end consumer, right? I was just DMing on Instagram with a couple of founders this weekend, giving them feedback on their product. And I remember when Gin Lane rebranded and pivoted to Pattern Brands, and they published this manifesto on Medium that I thought was fascinating. And one of the things that really jumped out to me was this idea of they weren't direct to consumer, they were direct with consumer. And I think
oh,
that's so
wow.
incredibly powerful. And I think that that really summarizes very well, again, the power dynamic shift from brand to consumer. And then now this idea of doing things together, which can be very scary for brand owners.
100%. And I would also say there's for sure a scary part and like a vulnerability part that um, owners need to have in order to be open and just like not always assume that they have all the answers and start to bring in their consumers, right? But then there's even the scary part with consumers where sometimes, and I think we're in this phase right now. This is truly like how I feel, that consumers are actually kind of tired of having to contribute to be part of it, right? Like I think they want to feel like they are connected and that that brand understands them. But I really think that we're in a place now where there's so much choice fatigue, and this is just a result of like all of these disruptor brands coming in and all of these options now all of a sudden flooding the market after decades of just really being only like 3 or 4 options. Um, and I think that consumers now, they don't want more choices. They want to be and this is, of course, Scott Galloway says this, so I can't take credit, but I totally agree. But he says, consumers don't want more choices, they want more confidence in their choices. And I think that's another piece that is needed to be considered by brands. Like, what is that balance between making it feel like you have a dialogue with your consumers and you're connected to your consumers, but ultimately if you're making the, greens powder that they take every day, like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing designing a greens powder. I know that like I probably need more greens in my life, and I want an easy way to do it,
In powder
and
form.
in powder form, and I and I want to make sure I just like get it in, and like everything else is a bonus from there, right?
Yes.
And I don't know how much magnesium you need to put in that. Can you just like figure that out for me? But I'll tell you that like, yes, I am probably not eating nearly enough fruits and vegetables I'm supposed to, even though I have hopefully a very balanced diet. It's things like
I eat way
that.
too much pasta. Yeah, I think that confidence will come from a couple of different sources. And so Andrea Hernandez of Snack Shot, she really coined the phrase curation as a service. So when
Mm,
we think about this idea of the infinite shelf, of infinite choice,
yeah.
and that confidence, I mean, there's this saying that people will believe absolute strangers on the internet over their friends and families, and certainly over brands. So you do see the Erewhons of the world. You see Foxtrot. You see, I mean, even Goop, right?
Yeah.
What they end up doing is they become this trusted voice in the category that they operate in. And sometimes it
Mhm.
crosses categories, but they're very specific about their audience. And
Right.
so people lean in because that platform or that brand in and of itself has credibility. And they say, oh, Erewhon, like if Erewhon says it's good, then I'm just gonna buy whatever is in, whatever they tell me effectively.
Yep,
And so we do talk about this idea of infinite choice or the illusion of choice, because even as an operator and as a business owner, you can't afford to offer infinite choice.
of
So
course.
how do you design your offerings in a way where the consumer feels like they can choose something that is speaks specifically to them, but at the end of the day, you still only have maybe a 10 product assortment.
Right, right. It's that sort of like 80-20 rule where it's like 80% are like the tried and true things that you go to, and then the 20% is a little bit of that, here's what's new and trending and let's try this together and kind of like jump into the deep end kind of thing. It's funny because the power of that trust used to live exclusively with retailers, right? So you would like go to Target and you would go, okay, this is available for purchase in Target or in Costco. Costco is like
I
the
trust both with my life, so
right?
you're speaking my love language here.
Don't even Brian is like salivating right now hearing me talk about Costco. But so those two retailers, are they have I would argue they've built their business on having incredibly savvy buyers, incredibly savvy people who, stock their shelves and design what their store experiences look like. And that power is still incredibly strong and hot, right? Like I know if I can go to Costco, that Kirkland signature brand, like they're giving me Grey Goose vodka. They say Kirkland signature on the bottle, but I know it's private label Grey Goose. And so the savvy consumers are always going to know that. But my point is that power has always been with retailers. It's very interesting to now see, I think, enabled by the ethos of D2C, maybe not like the business constructs of what D2C is as like a single channel, but the ethos of D2C being we are one brand and we are going to be incredibly narrowly focused on this audience, this type of consumer, like thinking about the Goop consumer that you brought up. That brings a very, very specific human into mind. And that person is going to be serviced by this particular brand. And then like I said, it used to be retailers and now it's brands. And I think that power shift or the ability to shift that power is magical if you can harness it, if you can do it.
And I'm excited to debate you on this
Ooh,
because I actually think that I agree with all of that, and I do think the power dynamic is shifting back because of the barrier to entry is lower of
yeah.
something that looks and feels D2C. And
Yep.
so I do think one of the biggest threats to D2C is private label. And I think that you
Mhm.
see that with Target, right? Love Target. They have such amazing private label brands. And as moms, Mondo Llama is one of my favorite ones. And that is their kids' crafts line. And they have all these little crafts packages for $5 or less. And Mondo Llama, it is private label. You would never think that by
Right.
looking at how it is packaged, how it is designed, but they effectively launched overnight with, in 200, I think 200 Target stores, and having, the front page takeover of their app. And
I
so that power of
yeah,
scale is just really unrivaled, I think.
I agree. I would say though that there is no Mondo Llama without the foundations that the D2C brands created.
Yes.
The
Yes, I
reason
agree.
why it feels like it's so specific to your needs is because what Target does, Target, you know, I'm a Target stan, so just to be clear,
Me too.
right? Like, just to be very clear, but I'm about to say something that, might not, if I work at Target, I'm going to like give me a side eye. But I genuinely feel this. They are not the innovators. Like, they're not the
No.
people who are going to disrupt, and they're not the people. They're like, but their ears are to the ground. And so they're like, I'm going to take these great ideas and I'm going to learn from what is happening in popular culture, what brands are resonating with mothers, with parents, with, families. And then I'm going to sort of distill that magic into these very, very tangible things, whether it's like their packaging or their way that they, their fonts or all of the branding things. They're brilliant at doing that and not making it feel cheesy or made up or like secondary, right? Which I think is the problem with a lot of like private label brands. it just feels cheaper. And Target was like, well, why do we have to do that? Why do we have to dumb down our private label brands? Why don't we just make them as cool and rad and like D2C esque as the D2C brands themselves? And I just applaud them for that. But I don't think they're ever the innovators. So I think it's this combination. They need D2C, and then D2C needs them to scale.
Yeah, I agree, and I think part of it is that large companies, they don't there is no reward to be an innovator in a niche space. Where their strength is to be a fast follow. They can take a
Yeah.
good idea, and by the time that it reaches a large enough audience or a large enough audience adoption, they can just put massive scale behind it. And so the way I think about it is that if we were to, uh, title our episodes like Star Wars episodes, I think it's Return of Private Label because it's not your mom's private label, right? I
Mm.
think Kirkland is an interesting case study in and of itself, which we can talk about in a future episode. But the fact that Costco sells Kirkland branded sweatshirts, and I almost got one, by the
Yeah,
way.
I saw one on someone, like, very fashionable the other day, and I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
"This is so smart on them."
Yes. Yes. So I actually need to buy it online. It wasn't in Costco. And so there's one that has it's a sweatshirt with Kirkland embroidered across it. And then there was another one that just had little Costco logos repeating all over the sweatshirt. It was like $21. I was like, of course I'm gonna do this. I'm a Costco stan. And
Is it
so
even Costco that's selling it though, or are there third parties that
no,
are just like
Costco is
oh,
selling it. It's
okay,
on their
good, good, good.
site. It's really quite remarkable, although I'm sure you can go on, any of those other sites and get a knockoff one. But I do think, I'm excited to continue to explore this idea brand, of brand interpretation, and I
Yeah,
think in terms of power dynamics in this new world where we don't have this laser focus on D2C. Like, D2C does not equal e-commerce. D2C is
100%.
a subset of that, and I think that what we're seeing too is a lot of these D2C purists, kind of growing up and understanding that the world is far bigger, which is why a lot of the conversations, it feels like we're in Groundhog's Day, right? When we
Mhm.
talk about MMM or attribution, or, awareness drivers where you can't really measure it or tie it to conversion, right? All angles of attribution that I think large companies have been battling for decades. And it's just interesting that the D2C purists are kind of, quote unquote, rediscovering that.
It is fascinating to me, and I think that D2C ultimately, it started as a channel, right? So it was like you had your website probably on Shopify, if you were lucky enough to start when they were starting, right? Because otherwise it was very difficult, but you still did that. And it was a place to sell direct to consumer. And then what happened was, I don't think they realized this at the time, but they were creating the blueprint for what a modern brand activation looks like, right? And so consumers went to Glossier or Warby Parker or Bonobos and they learned, oh, I could have a relationship like this with a brand. And it kind of opened up this world where, and I'll use, it's the Pandora's box thing again, where it became slowly over time. I'd say it took about 10 years to get there, but now they're kind of like looking at everything in their lives as something that represents who they are on this much deeper level. And so it graduated to not just being a sales channel, but being like a brand ethos or a marketing strategy that, and I'll be the first person to admit how important that is, while at the same time out of the other end of my mouth I'm going to say not every brand needs to like touch your heart. Like
It's true.
my window cleaner, like my Windex or whatever, like I don't need that to be an extension of who I am as a human being. Like I just need I
Well,
need it to clean my windows.
yeah, totally. And I think that along with the rise of D2C and this idea that you can get what you want immediately in the way that you want it, and this increased focus on what the digital shopping experience is, that also happened at the time of like the erosion of the in store experience.
Yes.
And so I
Right.
think that D2C actually gained much more traction because soon that experience just outshine the in-store shopper experience, because how many times you go into a store, right? You're going to a mall likely, and you're fighting for parking spaces, you're walking forever, you don't know where the store is. You go in and there's a limited offering because there's, again, infinite shelf. Online you have a much larger offering, and so you go in store, you don't find the thing that you want, or you find the thing that you want and they don't have your size.
Right.
And so I do think like those things happen simultaneously to create this perfect storm. And
Yeah.
so over the last 5 years, I would say that retailers are also kind of rethinking what that in-store experience needs to feel like and look like, and using digital as an extension of it or
Yeah.
an enhancement.
The smart ones are. Yes, I would
Yes.
agree. And again, like, we keep saying this word and it's so played out, and I kind of hate continuously saying it, but the word disruption, when you really think about it, you can only disrupt something that is prime for disruption, right? So it basically is a reflection, to your point, of retailers, physical retailers, and the more traditional retailers that have been around for 50, 100 years, that have been getting away, frankly, with not thinking about their consumers and not improving the experience or the product, and actually kind of the opposite in the chase for expanded profitability. They've actually decreased, right? So there's less. So think about the few years before D2C really became a thing. You walked into, like, that mall experience that you were saying, and, like, the hairs on my, like, arms stood up because it's so icky. Like, the people that they hired were not trained properly and not qualified to talk about the products. If you had actual questions, God help you. And it was like, then you bought, let's say you bought and you invested in, like, a cashmere sweater or something like that. It was nowhere near the quality that it was the years prior, right? And so it was this combination of, like, this really stale in-store experience, this really stale brands, and these brands that are trying to find efficiencies, so they're going offshore with their manufacturing, they're finding different materials, everything starts to become a blend versus, like, 100%, cashmere or wool or whatever, and all of those things. And then you have all of these younger brands that are like, "Ugh, I'm so tired of," and every single founder story is that exact same story, like the Warby Parker story.
Yep.
Why do glasses need to cost $600? Why
Casper.
Casper, the mattress. Yeah, it's like all of them, and those were real consumer problems. Like, people never set out to go and buy a mattress in a box, like, that wasn't a thing, but they were like, "Look, this is actually going to be faster, cheaper, smarter, better for you." And so they had this go-to-market ethos that I think was necessary, and ultimately as a response to the classical and traditional retailers, like, just falling asleep at the wheel a little bit. And now I think everyone's waking up, and I think the people that are going to have these more successful businesses, omni-channel going forward, are the ones that just are constantly innovating. They're making their in-store experience better. They're making their online presence better. They're improving their products. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I will blame the in-store experience on Abercrombie. I mean, remember when we were in high school and my mom hated to
Who
go
can
into the
forget?
stores with me because it was so loud, so dark. They were pumping all the perfume through their vents. And to your point about customer
Naked
service,
teenagers.
yeah, I mean, they weren't hired or trained like the staff in store. They weren't hired or trained to deliver customer service. They were there to look like models modeling the clothes. I think, in fact, they called them models.
Yeah,
And so, that I think is really fascinating because they looked at in-store as a marketing tool, as a
yeah,
way to reestablish the lifestyle that you are buying into rather than the $100 sweatshirt with Abercrombie and Fitch on top of it, right? And
yeah,
so that worked until it didn't. And so I think even like the rise of the re-rise, I guess, of Abercrombie in this new digital age, but they had to fix their product. I think that's a fascinating case study for us to look at as well. But I do
totally.
think like all of those things, And what we're coming down from is the boom and the promise of D2C, because a lot of those companies were floated by venture dollars when there was plenty of it. And so
Uh,
profitability wasn't a challenge. So they could continue to invest in things that didn't have an ROI for 3 years or 5 years, payback period, because everybody pointed at Amazon as, well, Amazon's not profitable. It's like, okay, well, that's missing the forest for the trees here. And so back to our Warren Buffett quote, the tide has receded.
yeah,
And so I think what you're seeing now is that the strongest, most holistic thinking brands will win when they view every channel as a lever that they can pull. And I think the smartest business people who balance business and experience will win. But I think a lot of those folks who were very idealistic when it came to DTC, like they didn't have to have the financial discipline of running a business because they rode the wave of venture dollars and then
right.
also a boom cycle of everyone just having more money.
Totally, totally, and I think so like, a lot of our episodes are going to go into a lot of these much more deep conversations, right? So we have conversations talking about growth and, like, channel and acquisition strategy, and what does it all look like now with the landscape of social media changing and CPMs going up, and does ROAS even matter anymore? And it's funny because all the, like, more traditional marketers are finally, like, knowing what ROAS means, and they're, like, using it, and it's kinda, like, cringy now where
They're
you're
like
like,
MER.
it's really, really fascinating, but, like, so that conversation is coming up, growth versus profitability, just, like, real talk, what does that look like? How do we reconcile between those 2? Is there a world in which those 2 live together? Oh my
Which we're
gosh.
on different sides on. I don't know. I keep thinking because, I think every CEO in 2021 was like growth. And then they go back and they're like 22, no, 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 profitable growth, right? Not just top line revenue growth. And so you and I, like, I'm so excited to dive into that together
Totally.
because there's a part of my brain that thinks profitable growth is achievable. But then everything, when I put my operator hat on, is like, I think it's a choice.
I mean, I think the people who have listened to me from the beginning know that I definitely think it's a choice. It's very much like, I think you can do profitable growth in a spoiler alert. You gotta just stay tuned. Stay tuned for the growth versus profitability conversation. These are all of the reasons I am unbelievably excited to go on this journey with you for season 3. There's so much to talk about, unpack from the business side of it, profitability, the venture and, shareholder side of it. What does it look like? Exit strategies, acquisition and retention, LTV, creative messaging. There's just a lot to unpack, and I'm excited. And I also would really love for the audience to share in what they think, ask us questions, challenge us on our positions. Let's have this be a dialogue. Because frankly, I would be the first to admit that none of us have the answers. I think we have some pretty experienced and educated assumptions and guesses based on all of the things that we've been exposed to. But I think it's definitely a dialogue that is worth having, is very, very timely. And I hope everyone will join us along the journey. Orchid, anything that you'd like to close with?
I was gonna say I have all the answers. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I have
That's why you're
opinions.
here. Thank
I
God.
have so many opinions, and people who have worked with me before know that if I say I don't have an opinion, it's because I'm extremely disinterested. So, yes, I have opinions. There are no perfect answers, I think. And I think that a lot of our answers will feel dissatisfying, but marketers will understand because the answer
Yeah.
will be, it depends. And so I'm
I
really
know.
excited to go through the season and really just talk about the nuances of a lot of these things because I think a lot of folks in the industry think that answers are very binary or black and white. And the reality is
Right.
that when you are maturing along with D2C or social media is still evolving, that you can only make decisions and have answers based on the information you have at the time,
Yeah.
but that may be irrelevant maybe 5 or 10 minutes from now. So I'm
Totally.
excited to go on this journey with you. I'm excited to hear your opinions and your experience on these things because I want to pressure test a lot of these ideas that we have and obviously, to your open invitation to the audience as well because only when we come together and bring different angles or philosophies to this, can our own thinking become clearer and stronger. And so I'm really, really
Totally.
excited to go on this journey with you for season 3 of Infinite Shelf.
Amazing. We're super lucky to have you and see you guys soon. Thanks for joining us.